The first thing I saw in the raw feed was a shadow that did not belong to any sun. It lay across a plain of red dust like a black peninsula, angular and precise, casting lines that intersected at impossible angles. My name is Dr. Elias Mercer, planetary geologist and former Mars survey lead for a university consortium, relieved of my post after I argued that some formations were artifacts, not coincidences. The image came from a public release labeled Surface Anomaly, but the pixel file was stamped with internal telemetry and a mission tag that should not have existed. I was standing on the roof of my apartment building in Tucson when I loaded the file and felt the air in my throat go cold. It was a Tuesday in late spring, the light already thin and copper through the desert haze. The institute labs I had worked in smelled like ozone and coffee. They felt safer than my inbox did now. The feed was a product of an orbital synthetic aperture instrument, a composite of microwave tomography, visual bands, and a depth template pasted over high-resolution mast cam captures. For weeks, scientists had argued over dunes and wind shadows, but nothing explained a structure with straight faces that aligned to a non-solar axis, nor a triangular mass with internal contours showing linear voids. Its shadow tightened like a sentence. The file name read PYR-CORE-031, and the metadata included a protocol marker I had only seen once before in a leaked document called Threshold. The first strange thing I did was not rational. I thumbed my left palm against the phone screen until the image crawled like a living skin. My fingertips came away warm, with dust I could almost feel as grit. I smelled the municipal lawn fertilizer drifting up from below, that green sourness I associated with other people's normal lives. Behind the apartment block, a distant siren found a pitch that felt like a throat clearing. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I would retch. The file had a fragment of audio embedded, a harmonic tone that rose in intervals that suggested resonance, not machinery. It hummed like an insect on a wire. I knew then that whatever I was looking at had a signature not produced by wind or rock. I did what anyone does when they are both curious and trained to be cautious. I saved the file locally, verified the checksum, ran a quick entanglement analysis to see if the meta referenced other nodes. There were 3 references. 2 pointed to classified repositories at a major space agency. 1 pointed to a private contractor's internal archive. There was also a human signature, a comment string in plain text, for eyes that know the math. It was signed only with the initials LP. Within hours, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number and a voice that watched me before speaking. Dr. Mercer, it said, calm and threaded with,
"They have a core under the slope. They have been indexing it. We need calculation. You are due." The call dropped before I could ask who they were. The apartment felt small, and the light through the curtains tasted metallic. I made the wrong cup of coffee. I have credentials stamped by years in labs and on rovers, but my authority now is mostly a name and a hunger to find patterns. The first chapter of this story is about confirmation bias and 2 hard truths. First, that institutions will sometimes hide data that complicates their narratives. Second, that a single image can reconfigure a career. If you stay with me, I will show you the raw files, the lines of code we used to extract depth from dust, the transcripts of calls I intercepted, and the decision I made when a triangle on another planet pushed against my sense of proportion. Investigation began like a jigsaw with missing pieces. I reached out to the handful of colleagues who still answered my messages. Dr. Lena Park, a remote sensing specialist at a university lab in California. Marcus Hale, a systems engineer who used to manage telemetry pipelines at a private orbital firm. Commander Ana Ortiz, on leave from mission operations, but with access to non-public comms. Aisha Bello, a freelance analyst who reads leaks like scripture. Pavel Ivanov, who curated satellite image repositories. And Zoe Kim, a linguist who maps patterns to meaning. Each answer threaded a new suspicion. The first real piece of evidence that could not be ignored was a set of thumbnails embedded in the PYR core bundle. They were low-resolution slices through the mass, showing interior channels like the struts of a cathedral. On closer spectral analysis, there were bands of reflectance that matched neither basalt nor oxidized hematite. Something in the geometry rejected expectation. Lena and I began a dialogue that read like two people arguing over a body at a crash site. I sent her the waveforms and the depth slices. She replied with a probabilistic readout, then with punctuation. "This is not natural." "How sure?" I asked. She sent back a block of code and 3 annotated images. They showed matched linearities and a recurring node pattern consistent with a manufactured template. Publicly, the agency statement was boilerplate. There was an official denial of structural anomaly, a neat recap of the rover's route anomaly, and a promise to release more data pending review. Privately, things moved faster and stranger. I received a secure packet that claimed to be a compilation of mission logs redacted for internal circulation. Within those logs was a comment from a mission architect I had once worked with, a line about redundancy and fail-safe templates being deployed when the core cross-thresholded certain resonance markers. The log read like a recipe: calibrate for resonance, deploy transfer matrix, avoid direct contact. The last item was circled in a handwriting
L. Park. The more we dug, the more correspondences we mapped across archives. Images from different orbits, taken months apart, when overlaid, revealed a consistent orientation. The pyramid's shadow bent toward coordinates that matched anomalies in magnetometer readings, and to a pattern of microseismicity recorded in a passively listening instrument on a lander. It was as if the structure hosted its own microclimate of physical laws. There were patterns of entanglement in the telemetry, where signals folded back into themselves, timestamps overlapping in a way that suggested a temporal misregistration. My phone would shudder as if someone in the file had breathed. The city of images began to build itself around named nodes. One file referenced Topo Node 7, another called it the core, another used the word threshold. In a liaison chat, Marcus sent a screenshot with a highlighted string, Integration Protocol 7.2 activated. Commander Ortiz replied in terse military cadence, "Do not engage without clearance." Pavel forwarded a satellite strip that showed a line of darkened soil leading to the structure. Aisha, who reads leaked memos like others read tea leaves, forwarded an intercepted email from a contractor saying they had been contracted to build a casing reflective to certain wavelengths. The contractor email used the phrase template and sample in the same sentence. My inbox became a ledger of trust. We met in the kind of places that avoid surveillance. The first meeting was in a parking garage under the university observatory, the echoing concrete keeping our voices honest. Lena arrived wearing a jacket dusted with chalk residue, hands still smelling faintly of lab solvents. Marcus came with a laptop bag that contained a hardware key and 1,000 small folders. Ortiz sat like a courted authority, her posture precise. Pavel had his camera gear. Aisha kept to the edges, eyes scanning for cameras. Zoe spoke in quiet, measured tones at the end, folding words into questions that peeled at assumptions. Our dialogue then was layered and necessary. Elias, the shadow line does not correspond with the sun vector. How do you explain that? Lena, it does not have to correspond to the sun to cast a projection. The data shows internal emission. Marcus, emission in what band? Thermal? Lena, in a resonance band. It appears in microwave tomography as a structured void. Ortiz, structured voids are not something you engage without command authorization. Pavel, the contractor's log mentions a casing. Could it be an artifact of deployment? Aisha. Deployment implies intent. Who deploys on Mars without a notice? Zoe. If intent is present, then language may also be embedded. Are you sure the harmonics are not natural? Elias. I have seen natural harmonics. This is layered, harmonically multiplexed. It is a signature. Lena. Multiplexing suggests a carrier. A carrier suggests deliberate transmission. Those exchanges were long, 8 to 10 full trade-offs, each sentence a probe. We examined waveforms, overlaid spectra, and argued until our voices bled into the hollow of the garage. Each time one of us asked a question, the others supplied a small parcel of evidence. We left with assignments and a nervous energy that tasted like copper on the tongue. As our private dossier swelled, we began to encounter resistance that felt procedural at first and then like a pressure. Our access to primary repositories became throttled. Marcus found his encryption keys quietly revoked. Pavel's uploads stalled. Lena's lab coordinator received a call reminding them of research protocols and the importance of national security considerations. The pattern was not subtle. It looked like the agency had layers of seals, and someone had pulled a net over the files we were following. The second major reveal came in the form of an audio clip that someone had embedded in a file labeled VoiceLoad 0903. It was a 6-second snippet with harmonic overtones that, when slowed, produced a pattern of frequencies that mapped onto the internal channels we had observed. Zoe ran her linguistic filter and found repeated intervals that mirrored phonemic clusters, not unlike human speech, but folded through microtonal layers. When we played it through speakers, it felt less like language and more like a chorus of the planet itself. Commander Ortiz went pale and reached for her throat as if to stop something inside. This was the moment for the comments. If you were in my place, what would you do? I will ask it plainly because I want a ledger that is public and human. If you had to choose between investigating until the end, potentially exposing something that could alter our understanding of space and agency behavior, or destroying the files to protect what you believe the public should not know, which would you choose? Begin your reply with investigate or destroy and explain in a few lines your reasoning. Your replies will matter. I read them. I use them to test hypotheses and to see where curiosity meets caution. For now, keep reading. An ally arrived at dusk the day after the audio clip. Her name was Lena Park, but she carried more than credentials. She had an internal passcode that opened parts of the archive we had not seen. She moved like someone who had practiced stealth and honesty in equal measure. In her hand she carried a memory slate with decoded logs and a plan. She had found something called an integration matrix, a small batch of code that indicated attempts to harmonize the structure to a carrier wave. She said she had a contact inside the agency who could not reconcile what was happening either. The contact had left breadcrumbs. We met at a diner that smelled of coffee and frying oil. The lights buzzed with a sickly hum. Lena slid a paper napkin across the table with numbers scribbled in a cramped hand. She explained in a low voice what the integration matrix did. It was not an engine. It was an instruction set, a cultural analog for a machine that set parameters for. It asked the environment to sing back at certain frequencies. The matrix had redundancy and a fail-safe clause labeled collapse. In lay terms, it could force local material conditions to realign, to create a template in which ordinary rock began to behave like constructed matter. Elias. Who do you know in there? Someone who worked on calibration. They could not live with what they saw. Marcus. That contact risked everything. How do we trust the feed? The contact sent a snippet we verified against raw mastcam compression. It matches. Ortiz. If that matrix can prompt physical alignment, then this is not excavation. This is activation. Aisha. Activation of what? We do not even know if the pyramid is native or planted. Zoe. But if language is embedded in harmonics, then origin is a cultural question, not just geological. Pavel. The contractor email about casing now reads like an earlier stage. Maybe the casing was meant to mask an activation site. Lena. The note said template, sample, integration. It reads like they had a blueprint. In the diner, the coffee tasted like ash, and the napkin numbers glowed in my hand. Lena told us about a threshold marker, a meta-index that occurred when the structure's internal resonance crossed a certain amplitude. That marker had been tripped in past data weeks before the public release. The agency had marked the event as an anomalous reading and then redacted it. The contractor logs suggested a fail-safe procedure. Remove any human presence before a controlled integration. The word remove, as it appeared in the logs, had no gentle connotation. That night, my apartment felt surveilled. My shower ran with a metallic taste, and the mirror fogged oddly, as if exhalation on glass were being read. Sleep came fitful and short. Early in the morning, an email arrived from an anonymous address with a single line. We did not build it to be friendly. The attachment was a low-res night pass of the structure showing a faint gleam at one apex that modulated every 17 minutes. I watched the modulation until my eyes throbbed. The chase quickened into pursuit. We planned a course of action that mixed technology and audacity. Marcus proposed a readout maneuver. Align a small CubeSat to the pyramid's coordinates and sweep across the resonance band with a passive listening rig. Lena would model the internal channels with a voxel reconstruction. Pavel would prepare ground overlays to check for correlations with known landing sites. Aisha would begin cross-referencing contractor invoices. Zoe would analyze the harmonics for syntax. Ortiz, because she still had contacts, would place a formal request with mission operations to send a sanctioned observation. We argued ethics, chain of command, and likely outcomes while the sun moved like a hand across the desert. Each of us carried a private fear of being the one who lit the match. The first encounter with active suppression happened when Marcus's CubeSat proposal was denied without explanation, and then flagged. A legal notice arrived, terse and stamped with agency headers, warning of interference with mission operations. Marcus tried to appeal and received a call back from someone calling herself Agent Cole. Her tone was congenial and closed. She explained that some images were sensitive for national security reasons and that unauthorized dissemination could jeopardize ongoing operations. Marcus pressed until she said that continued activity would be considered adversarial. He stopped. We decided to proceed covertly. Marcus and Pavel modified a secondary payload with a listening rig and launched it on a commercial manifest, burying the mission within legal framework. Lena wrote code that would isolate the modulation and map it to structural nodes. The CubeSat, small and unremarked, slipped into a low Mars insertion as a piggyback. For 2 days we held our breath as telemetry trickled in. Then the rig picked up a pattern. What we heard was not a voice in any language I recognized. It was an ordered sequence of harmonics with intervals that, when converted to spatial coordinates, matched the interior channels we had seen. It was as if the structure was communicating with itself and we were eavesdropping on its internal liturgy. The pattern repeated at modules that suggested a timer or a process. Lena ran the code and found correspondences with known crystalline lattices, in which dislocations propagate along certain axes. The pyramid seemed to be modulating stress on local lattices, instructing materials to rearrange to its template. My skin crawled. Our luck, and perhaps our audacity, invited peril. The first confrontation was quick and physical. A van trailed Marcus as he drove back from the launch hub. Someone in the back tried to break the driver window with a baton. Marcus swerved, lost a rearview mirror, and managed to pull into a police lot where a patrol took the report. The van peeled away. The police report later found no leads. Marcus swore he saw a sticker on the van with a contractor logo we had photographed earlier. Panic tasted like metal on the tongue and a low pressure in the ears. The second confrontation was inside the archives. Lena attempted to retrieve a core sample data dump, and the Institute account that had served as her backdoor closed on her. Her screen went black, and a logged notice said, "Account suspended for security." She left the lab with a bag of phone hardware and a face like a struck bell. Later that evening, she told us someone had left a book of calibration notes on her doorstep with one page circled, integration, not isolation. The third moment was an auditory assault in my apartment. At 2 in the morning, my phone woke me with a low harmonic. It was the same modulation, only louder, as if someone had tuned the planet to sing directly into my skull. I staggered to the window and looked out at the empty street. The air smelled of rain and frying oil. A drone passed low, a small shape with lights like the eyes of a fish. It hovered and then left. At the time, I took it as a warning. We tried to respond as scientists who still believed in containment. Zoe crafted a proposal for a fail-safe insertion that would send a test pulse to the structure with a null template, an act of attempted sabotage that would collapse the local resonance without damaging global coherence. It was an ethically fraught plan. We worried about consequences. What if the collapse induced structural release in a way that propagated? The dilemma split us. Lena argued that the structure could not be allowed to activate unchecked. Ortiz insisted on following a chain of command. I argued for a controlled interruption. We attempted diplomacy first. Through back channels, Ortiz sent a message to Mission Ops offering to broker a joint observation and controlled interaction. The reply was a refusal and a brief reminder about jurisdiction. The refusal pushed us into a smaller circle. We had to choose, attempt the failsafe ourselves or wait for an authority that seemed intent on containment through silence. Our private chat filled with the binary choice that now haunted our comment thread: investigate or destroy. The act of sabotage was not cinematic. It was a laboratory exercise in humility and terror. Marcus and Pavel met at a storage facility outside of town and assembled the hardware. Lena uploaded a set of phase inversions to the CubeSat and crafted a null template designed to damp the modulation at the apex nodes. The technical description, in short, is this. We prepared an inverse phase carrier matched to the pyramid's dominant harmonic, amplified by a low-power transmitter, and scheduled pulses to coincide with the modulation apex. The intent was to introduce destructive interference that would attenuate the internal resonance without adding energy to the system. The plan required precise timing, redundancy in case of failure, and a failsafe to cut power if responses escalated. It sounded like a controlled experiment on a sleeping beast. The attempt to neutralize triggered something else. The pyramid's response was immediate. Telemetry showed a spike in local electromagnetic activity and a sudden reconfiguration of shallow strata in the adjacent plane. The CubeSat recorded a burst of harmonics that overlapped human bands, and then a silence that felt like a held breath. For 37 seconds, there was a sound I can only describe as a cord that wrapped itself around the mind like a hand. Lena vomited when she heard the playback. Marcus swore he saw a light along the edge of the map like a seam unzipping. The structure did not crumble. It changed. After the event, an agency notice came down. All private observation of Mars assets was to be suspended pending review. The official line called our activity reckless and potentially dangerous. Agent Cole left a voicemail with more warmth than I expected. She asked us to stop. She said the agency had reasons to quarantine certain data. She implied that the structure had properties beyond our understanding, and that national security, not public curiosity, would guide the next steps. Her voice held a strange sympathy, as if she wanted to protect us from being hurt or from knowing too much. The collapse, if anything, seemed to be an integration, a folding of local field into larger field, and a transfer of energy that realigned microtopography. Nearby rocks showed fractures with angles that mirrored interior channels. Small magnetometer nodes registered inversions in polarity. The pyramid's apex now glinted with a faint iridescence that wasn't reflectance but a subtle change in refractive index. What we had thought an attempt at sabotage did not destroy the structure. It taught us its thresholds. At that point, the narrative shifted into cognitive intensity. We realized the pyramid's template might be iterative, designed to co-opt local materials into its schema. Theoretical explanations circulated. Perhaps it was a seeded construct used by someone to terraform or to test dimensional folds. Terms like dimensional fold and entanglement began to appear in our private notes alongside more ordinary words like protocol and sample. Lena produced a model that suggested a feedback loop, where local geology aligned, then transmitted a low-frequency carrier, then reoriented adjacent grains into alignment, and so on. If true, the pyramid was an engine of integration. There was an ethical counterexample in our circle. Aisha argued that this may be a cultural artifact, not a weapon. She feared that our attempt to neutralize might have been a form of cultural vandalism. Zoe argued that if the harmonics contained language, we might have silenced a voice that was not ours to silence. The debate turned into a confrontation of philosophies, to act as guardians of humankind or as custodians who protect the unknown. Each option carried risk. It culminated in a confrontation that was partly physical and mostly cognitive. Commander Ortiz arranged a meeting with Agent Cole under the guise of de-escalation. The meeting took place in a windowless room at the edge of a federal facility. Agent Cole was direct. She explained, without revealing everything, that the agency had long ago encountered structures that did not conform to known engineering. Some projects were classified not only for security, but for their potential to destabilize public trust. She told us that the pyramid in the feed had been detected by internal instrumentation as an anomaly in a test region some years before, and that multiple teams had been formed to monitor its parameters. Their protocols favored containment, data vaulting, and selective release. Elias, why quarantine? Why not open science? Cole, because the effect is not only physical, it affects systems that we cannot yet model reliably. Ortiz, if it affects systems, who decides? Cole, the agency has a fail-safe committee with jurisdiction. Because of potential propagation risk, we must be conservative. Lena, conservative to whom? The public? Cole, to the survival of systems we depend on. Aisha, that is a moral choice made in secret. Cole, it is also
a pragmatic choice. Some information, if out, causes panic and miscalculation. Marcus? Or it prevents us from learning how to manage it. Cole, that is the paradox. Her answers left us both angry and unsettled. We had crossed into an arena where scientific curiosity bumped into institutional caution, and the result was friction that could burn communities. We realized then that our fight was not merely to reveal, but to decide whether to trust centralized judgment or a distributed public that might react unpredictably. The climax of our story was a cognitive reconfiguration that took place 3 weeks after our intervention. Satellite feeds began showing a mosaic of bright nodes extending from the pyramid across a corridor of ground that had been previously unremarked. These nodes glowed faintly in a non-visible band detected by our instruments, and then, in some cases, flickered into visible iridescence. Analysts noted that the pattern mirrored an old map of rover paths and dormant drilling sites. Someone had seeded coordinates into local infrastructure. We attempted a final act of sabotage, this time less kinetic and more informational. Zoe devised a counter-template, a packet of symbolic data encoded in harmonics designed to interrupt the pyramid sequence with concepts. It was an experiment to teach rather than to destroy. The idea was to introduce redundancy of meaning so the structure's integration algorithm might prefer a template that valued stasis over propagation. Lena warned of unknown side effects. I authorized it. We inserted the data into a carrier and broadcast it covertly. The response was immediate and strange. For hours, the ground near the site registered microseismic harmonics that resembled patterns we had programmed. Then a silence, like the closing of a book. The nodes dimmed. For a few days, nothing extraordinary happened. Then, the community of agencies released a joint statement acknowledging an unidentified structure in the region and promising a comprehensive investigation. It was the nearest thing to concession that the agency would give. Public curiosity exploded. But the resolution was not clean. The structure did not become a museum piece. Instead, it integrated a new state. Its internal channels reoriented to include the counter-template, and the apex shimmered with a color none of us could name. The agency moved in, deploying teams and sealing perimeters. They posted guard units and bureaucratic signs. Some instruments recorded new behaviors. The pyramid began emitting low harmonics that, when analyzed, corresponded to intervals found in human music. The pattern of emission hinted at an intelligence that was not human but had learned to mimic human cultural artifacts. It was terrifying. Consequences rippled outward. Local unmanned weather buoys recorded shifts in correlative patterns. A private observatory posted images that were later removed. Social feeds filled with speculation, some useful, much of it conspiratorial. The agencies strengthened information control. Our group was fractured. Some of us were brought in for interviews and admonished. Marcus and I faced legal counsel. Lena disappeared for a week and then reappeared with bruises on her.
Hands and a defiant glare. Pavel published a dataset anonymously and then took it down. Aisha wrote a long essay about the ethics of discovery that moved through niche journals and then into mainstream outlets. Zoe began teaching a class on nonverbal language in which students mapped harmonics to cultural templates. The end did not look like a movie. It looked like paperwork, press conferences, and small acts of courage. We had managed to force a public conversation, but we had not unmade the structure. The pyramid had changed us, our institutions, our definitions of artifact and organism, and our laws about what could be shared. We were left with a practical choice: either accept a world where some knowledge is quarantined, or work to build protocols that could responsibly integrate anomalous data into public science. There were moments of tension I will never forget, each compressed into 2 or 3 paragraphs of memory. The van that chased Marcus and left no trace. The night my phone filled with harmonics and a drone floated like an accusation above the street. The way the CubeSat's playback made Lena fall to her knees and vomit. The silence that followed the counter-template like a held breath. And the day the agency statement made the pyramid official. Each of those events lasted less than a minute in real time and stretched into months in the mind. Panic felt like a pressure in the ears and a coldness under the tongue. Hope tasted like old coffee. Courage smelled like disinfectant and engine oil. Behind my present narration sits a backstory that explains why I could not walk away. I grew up in a town where nothing extraordinary happened and where we measured miracles by the size of the harvest. My father was an engineer who taught me to measure displacement with a ruler and to trust what repeated itself. My mother taught me patience and how to read the weather in the color of clouds. I studied rocks because they were patient things that kept records. In graduate school, I learned to find patterns in noise. I learned to love the way data layered like paper. I lost the patience of institutions early. At one lab meeting, I argued that a formation on Earth was a ruin, not a rock. My superiors called the claim speculative, and I was sidelined. That sidelining became a pattern. I took a job mapping atmospheres because it paid the bills and gave me nights awake with telescopes. When the Mars data started to look less like dunes and more like text, I felt that old itch. The career I had nurtured became a ledger of grudges and hopes. I was good at seeing repetitions where others saw randomness. That skill made me useful in some circles and a nuisance in others. Why stay involved? Because of the moral arithmetic of discovery. If you find something that can change how we think about life, infrastructure, or responsibility, you must decide. If knowledge is a public good or a private hazard. My backstory is not heroic. It is a ledger of small choices. To ask questions when silence was easier. To favor transparency when secrecy promised security. And to stubbornly assume that the public could handle the truth if given context and care. My life prior to Mars taught me to weigh evidence, choose words carefully, and, when necessary, face the consequences of asking why. There are procedural descriptions that must be precise. When we prepared the inverse phase broadcast, we modeled the pyramid's dominant spectrum, designed an inverse waveform, and matched it in time domain to the apex modulation. We used low-power transmitters phased in redundancy to avoid catastrophic energy injection. We tested on scaled analogs to project stress distribution, and we prepared a fail-safe cutoff that would terminate the broadcast if seismic response exceeded predetermined thresholds. That procedure was small in description and large in moral consequence. The months after the agency assumed control were an exercise in distributed grief and bureaucratic maneuvering. 1 month later, the official investigations had begun, but with limited transparency. Reports leaked. Journalists camped near the facility. The world argued on social media. I was called to a hearing in which my group was admonished and thanked in the same breath. Some colleagues lost clearance. The contractor involved denied wrongdoing and claimed plausible engineering error. Communities of amateur analysts found patterns and mapped them into cities of conjecture. The pyramid remained behind fences, its apex glinting like a promise. People who lived near the facility reported strange dreams and a humming in the water. The agency released a sanitized photo with a disclaimer. 3 months in, the situation had mutated into policy. The agency formed a joint oversight board with international partners and outside scientists to study the structure under strict protocols. The board's mandate was to develop an integration protocol that balanced open science and containment. Yannick from Paris, Dr. Priya Sharma from Bangalore, and Professor Okafor from Lagos were named to the panel. My name was listed among consultants, but with limited access. Public education campaigns attempted to translate resonance signatures into simple metaphors for public comprehension. The contractor's stock slipped and then stabilized. Conspiracy theories hardened into industries. Our original data set was patched with redactions and partial releases. Lena published a paper that was peer-reviewed but with sections blacked out. 6 months after the event, the world had integrated the pyramid into a new kind of normal. The agency opened a controlled visitor center where vetted journalists and scientists could view curated data. There were tours with guided explanations that used words like matrix and template in ways that attempted to soothe. International delegations arrived to see the structure through protected lenses. New laws were debated about the handling of anomalous objects in extraterrestrial contexts. Some legal scholars argued for a planetary heritage clause that would prevent unilateral secret management. The pyramid itself had stabilized into an odd hybrid, part structure, part instrument, part message. It emitted harmonics at times that matched certain human musical modes, and at others emitted frequencies that seemed to correlate with planetary tides. People in distant cities reported dreams that included triangular spaces and low harmonies. Children began drawing pyramids with lines that connected stars. The world had not ended. It had folded a new seam into itself. After all that, what did I lose? I lost the ease of anonymity and the ability to disbelieve. I gained a responsibility that sat in my chest like a small compass. The agency offered me a seat at a table from which decisions were made without full transparency. I refused at first, wanting to keep independence. Then I accepted a consultative role because I feared that absence might leave the table to voices that sought control rather than stewardship. The choice felt like adopting a burden I had not solicited. There is a final choice I will leave for you because it is yours to carry. If a structure on another world begins to change local physics, who gets to decide what to do? Do we prioritize containment and authority, or do we build distributed protocols of transparency that allow public participation with safeguards? That is the question I ask when I look at the pyramid's shadow and hear its low music in the night. I will end with facts and a ledger of small truths. The pyramid exists. It is not a natural dune formation. Instruments show internal channels, emitted harmonics, and template-like behavior. Agencies have established control and are developing protocols. Some parts of the story remain hidden, redacted for reasons that are both sensible and infuriating. There will be more releases and perhaps more interventions. People will argue that secrecy saved them from panic. Others will say secrecy robbed them of agency. The choice has consequences. It will not resolve quickly. If you have followed this far, I ask one thing. Decide how you answer the question I posed earlier. Write in the comments whether you would investigate or destroy, and why. Your words matter for the public ledger of choice. Subscribe to follow the documents I will release as they become available, and to be part of a community that tries to balance curiosity with care. I chose to witness and to push for transparency. The universe opened a triangular door and left us with the option to paint on its threshold or to close it. The question remains, what will you do when you find a door that was never meant for you, but now stands open? Choose with care and keep your ears open to the sound of distant harmonics.